Thank you, Mr. President. This week, our nation observes National Police Week. And this year, during National Police Week, we pay tribute to 143 officers who died in the line of duty during 2016. Among them, Sergeant Alan David Brandt of the Fairbanks Police Department. Sergeant Brandt's wife, Natasha, and children Fritz, Kate, Claire, and Belle have traveled all the way from Fairbanks to participate in the events this week, and they're accompanied by Alan's best friend, Officer Phil McBroom of the North Pole Police Department, as well as a large group of colleagues from the Fairbanks Police Department led by Chief Eric Jukes. The group of them was hopefully going to be here visiting with me and with Senator Sullivan today, and they have been engaged in meetings all afternoon. So I come to the floor to address not only Sergeant Brandt, but all those officers who serve us so honorably. Chief Jukes, joined by Sergeant Lockwood and Officer Werner, joined 2,200 officers from around the nation in a 4-day bike ride from northern New Jersey to Washington, D.C. They call it the Police Unity Tour. And their motto is, "We ride for those who died." Police Week begins with the dedication of names added this year to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial on Judiciary Square. And that dedication occurs during a very, very moving candlelight vigil at the beginning of Police Week. The candlelight vigil was conducted on Saturday evening on the National Mall this year. And Chief Jukes, in full uniform, read Alan's name before a crowd numbering 10,000 people or more. A bell was rung acknowledging the loss of Alan David Brandt. Alan's name was the only Alaska name added to the wall this year. I'd like to thank Craig Floyd, who is the president of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, for the courtesy in affording Chief Jukes this special honor. But Alan's name is now inscribed in perpetuity on the memorial wall among the 21,000 officers who have made the ultimate sacrifice. His name appears on the bottom of panel 21 East, and this week the shoulder patch of the Fairbanks Police Department is affixed at the top of that panel. And quite coincidentally, a few lines up on that same panel are the names of officers Matt Tokuka and Anthony Wallace of the Hoonah Police Department, who were brought down in 2010. During Police Week, we do not dwell on the circumstances under which law enforcement officers gave their lives. We rather focus on how they lived their exemplary lives. And yes, we pay our respects to the fallen. But Police Week also looks forward, moves forward. Concerns of police survivors, which help those who've suffered a law enforcement tragedy, grieve and ultimately recover, is an important part of this week as well. And while so much of Police Week is for the law enforcement family, those of us around cannot help but notice what is going on around us. We're able to truly see the faces behind those uniforms and those badges. And we can look into the eyes of the families. Many visiting officers bring their spouses, some bring their children. You can see on the metro, sitting atop their father's shoulders, children who are part of the week. At the candlelight vigil, one of my staff members witnessed a U.S. Park Police officer in uniform explaining to her young daughter the meaning of the ceremony. And you'll hear the words of the children at the memorial wall itself, where Emma Moody, the 10-year-old daughter of a fallen California officer, left a hand-drawn memorial to her dad, and it reads, "When I get to heaven, the first thing I'm going to do is find you. The second thing I will do is never, ever let you go again." Mr. President, when you experience things like this, you cannot help but appreciate the humanity behind the uniforms. A father, a mother, an aunt, an uncle, a friend, a colleague. Law enforcement is no stranger to controversy, and yet it is so important that we see beyond the controversy, that we see the humanity that runs towards danger and not from it. The humanity that responds to every call for service, not knowing whether it will be the last. The humanity that kisses a child goodbye before beginning a shift, not knowing whether he will ever see those children again. The humanity that was Alan Brandt. Because the story that I just recited is Alan's story. Alan was released from the hospital after being shot 5 times by an assailant. And Alan lived long enough to appear before the Fairbanks City Council and thank the community for their support. But he also offered some very cautionary words. He said, "Our officers do a very hard job, most of the time thankless. Working weekends when their friends are with their families, working nights and sleeping during the day. We need your support, and not just when bad things happen." A few weeks later, Anchorage police officer Arn Saleo thought he was responding to a call involving a dispute between a cab driver and his passenger, but when he arrived at the scene, he was ambushed and shot 4 times. Miraculously, Officer Saleo survived his injuries. In spite of these tragedies, it is dispiriting that people continue to challenge law enforcement. Last week, Colonel James Cockrell retired after 30 years with the Alaska State Troopers. And just prior to his retirement, he reflected on the dangers that troopers face. And I'd like to share with the Senate a few lines from an interview with K2UU in Anchorage. Assaults on Alaska State Troopers are up from 52 in 2013 to 131 last year. And Colonel Cockrell said, "I think there's generally a little bit less respect for law enforcement. I think a lot of that spurred from the lower 48. We're having troopers contact people in a one-on-one situation. Individuals are more apt to fight with us if they think we have an advantage when we don't have backup. We don't have 2 or 3 troopers responding to a high-risk crime in progress. The consequences are that people are more apt to fight with our troopers." Mr. President, all of this is just deeply tragic, and as I look across the nation, we're not really seeing any signs of abatement. Some might be attributable to the opioid crisis, some to a loss of respect for law enforcement, and some simply because suspects challenge law enforcement in hopes of evading them. This year, law enforcement has already suffered 48 line of duty deaths, 17 of those from gunfire. And this fact is not lost on the officers from Interior Alaska who are in our nation's capital this week. And it's not lost on those who are considering law enforcement careers, but decide to perhaps take a pass, leaving critical vacancies in agencies throughout the country. Law enforcement remains very dangerous work, and for all the satisfaction that comes from serving people in their darkest moments, there are no guarantees that the officer will return home. I hope that during this National Police Week and throughout the years, we will reflect on Alan Brandt's final words, the words that he said, "Law enforcement needs our support, and not just when bad things happen." And in these times, law enforcement needs that support now more than ever. So on behalf of my Senate colleagues, I offer my continued condolences to Natasha Brandt and her family, to Alan Brandt's colleagues, and to survivors of law enforcement tragedies everywhere. I thank the President, and I yield the floor and would suggest the absence of a quorum.